everybody. Welcome and thank you for being here. So I am going to do a video today on the Reptilians and the Great Awakening. This is a video that I have been sitting with for quite some time, and I have been waiting until I got the absolute nudge from my guides that it's time to share it now. And so that now moment is now. And so before I begin, there are a couple things I want to say. One, this message is coming through me. This information comes through me from the Galactic Federation of Light. And this is a very large collective of higher dimensional light beings that are basically Earth's guides. They are watching over Earth's journey or process of ascending into higher states of consciousness. And they are also watching over humanity. And they work with humans to provide information and guidance and a remembrance of what we are doing here and what this is all about. And so the information that I'm sharing today is not something that I researched. It's not something that I created and made up. I have no idea how I know this other than it came in and it is an absolute truth from the Galactic Federation of Light. Now, it doesn't need to be your truth. You do not need to hold this as your truth. So when you begin this video, and if all of a sudden you say, nope, I don't believe this is nonsense, please just turn the video off. I am not here to argue or debate any of these points. This is purely a message that will either resonate or not resonate. And if it doesn't resonate, beautiful. If it resonates, fabulous. I asked my guides, what is the intention of me doing this video? Why am I doing this video now? And they said it is to remind the human, because you all know what's happening, to remind the human what they are actually clearing and alchemizing right now. To allow the human to understand the bigger picture, the behind the scenes of everything they are courageously navigating. Because you see, we live in a third dimensional field, which is physical. So what we are seeing is a physical shift in consciousness. So it looks like humans doing things, experiences happening, right? We are watching it physically with our eyes. But there is an energetic experience beyond the physical that's actually what we are alchemizing. It's the consciousness beyond what we physically see that we're alchemizing. And that is why they want me to do this video, to remind you of what that energy is, what that consciousness is. It's like the Wizard of Oz. There's that loud voice, that man's voice, right? That's telling them what to do and controlling them and putting massive amounts of fear in them, right? And they're afraid of this voice and they can't see the voice. It's the same with the human collective. There is this voice that, unbeknownst to us, has been controlling and manipulating our light, our human journey, for a very long time, for thousands of years. There's no good or bad about this. It just is. It's part of the human experience that we've been having for thousands of years. And when you pull back the curtain, you see that it's just one man standing there, and he's old and fragile, right? And when you do that, you dismantle the fear. You dismantle the control and power and manipulation. And this video is pulling back the curtain so that when you go about your everyday, courageously navigating it, however you're doing it, you will remember that beyond the curtain, beyond what you're seeing out there, it's a consciousness that we're alchemizing or clearing. So let's begin, okay? I want you to have an open mind Okay, some parts of this video will sound like a science fiction movie. But settle back, go beyond judgment or attachment to sort of ideas and expectations, and just allow yourself to listen. See if you can just listen energetically to what's coming through. Okay? Okay. So first, what is the Great Awakening? The Great Awakening is this physical shift that we're currently in right now. It is going from, it's the collective human experience. So every human on the earth plane is the collective consciousness that is physically shifting into higher states of consciousness or higher frequencies. So the Great Awakening is when more humans begin to hold higher frequencies in their body and wake up. It's going from, it's the collective consciousness, the human collective consciousness, going from a lower state of consciousness to a higher state of consciousness, or from dark to light. I don't like that term, but lots of people use that, right? From lower density to higher density, from a third dimensional matrix to a fifth dimensional matrix, from 3D to 5D, right? That's the first massive physical shift. So that is the Great Awakening. It's the humans turning on, coming online, waking up, beginning to hold higher frequencies in order to shift the entire human collective. So how are we actually alchemizing or making this physical shift in consciousness, right? How do we do it? The way we do it is that we allow or we watch systems and people that are controlling those systems that have been in place for a very long time, hundreds and thousands of years. We have to allow and watch those systems come up to the surface so that we can actually physically see them, so that we hear about them, we listen to them, we watch them, we become aware of them, we feel them. We feel these systems. And as these systems come up into our awareness, we then have the ability to shine light, seeing it, speaking about it, feeling it. You shine light on it. And when you shine light on the denser consciousnesses, these systems, they begin to dissolve or alchemize, they shift, and they move into a different state of consciousness. So they actually dissolve and they move into a higher frequency. These systems are controlled by a small group of humans, and these systems are held, they hold fear, massive amounts of fear, control, manipulation, greed, mind control. These are large systems of consciousness that are inside these systems. So what are these systems? They're government, they're environmental, they're educational, they're the banking systems, they're the entertainment systems. They're all of these paradigms or ways in which we have been programmed to live within for thousands of years. And they are controlled by a small amount of humans that have been the puppeteers controlling millions of other humans that control these systems. They control the government, they control the media, they control the school systems, they control the banking systems. Believe it or not, there is a small group of humans as puppeteers controlling other humans that are controlling those systems. And we've been unaware of it. And we are starting to wake up and see these systems for what they are in order to alchemize them into light. That's the Great Awakening. Now, who's controlling these systems? What small minority of humans are controlling them? Humans that are holding a consciousness or an energy that we call reptilian. The reptilian consciousness is inside of the small minority of humans that are controlling the large majority of humans on the earth plane. And so let me explain the reptilian consciousness, okay? Okay. I want you to see the reptilian consciousness not as a physical reptilian like you've seen on Google. You know, those really scary looking faces and those scary physical bodies. If you see reptilians as that, you're going to have a hard time understanding what I'm about to share with you. These reptilians, when they move down into our third dimensional field, I want you to imagine that we're in a cloud of third dimensional consciousness. And when you enter into it, you are now existing inside of a third dimensional consciousness or a third dimensional field, a very physical field. Reptilians are consciousness and energy first, just like you. You are not a human. You're not this physical body. You're not. You're a higher consciousness, spirit, source, soul, galactic being, angel, whatever you want to call it, but you came from somewhere else. You did not come from the third dimension. You did not come from the earth. You did not come from this body. You came into the body as a consciousness. The reptilians are exactly the same thing. Here's the difference between the reptilians and your consciousness and our third dimensional physical bodies. The reptilians exist as fourth dimensional consciousness outside of the third dimensional earth plane and field. Okay? So that not the fourth dimensional field that you're experiencing on the earth plane. They were created and designed in a fourth dimensional field that never experienced the third dimension. They don't have this restricted, contained, vision, like tunnel vision that we have in the third dimension. They are in a higher frequency than your third dimensional body. They're in a higher frequency than the third dimensional field. So you actually can't see them, okay? Some people can see them if they move themselves into higher frequencies, just like you can't see angels right now, right? Or higher dimensional light beings like Palladians and those types of higher dimensional beings. We will eventually begin to see these beings, but right now, most of us can't because we are still very deeply in a third dimensional cloud. Reptilians are holding themselves as fourth dimensional consciousnesses and fourth dimensional beings. They are fourth dimensional. They're not experiencing themselves as fourth dimensional. You are a higher consciousness experiencing yourself in third dimension. Reptilians were designed and created as fourth dimensional beings. They exist in a fourth dimensional field outside of the earth plane. And because of that, they are highly intelligent. They understand the quantum field. They understand how the quantum field works. The quantum field is where you understand that everything exists in the now and that you have access to any other dimensional field if you manipulate energy and consciousness and to bring yourself into that dimensional field. They understand how to warp time, condense time, speed up time. They understand how to move in and out of a third dimensional field. They understand how to move through physical objects. They understand how to annihilate something in an instant. They have an awareness and an understanding of energy that we as third dimensional ego mind personalities don't have yet. Okay, so that's very important to understand as we move forward in this story. They're very intelligent. They're vibrating in a fourth dimensional frequency. And they have access to the quantum field. Okay, so we want to understand that. It's a consciousness first, before you see it as a body. So how did these fourth dimensional beings that we call reptilians, how did they get into and on the earth plane? And in order for me to understand this, I have to go back to the very beginning. And I'm going to put the link to this video that I'm about to describe to you down below. I did a video a year and a half ago about the 12th dimensional grid, and it's an extremely important video. I'll link it down below. When the Earth was originally designed in a fifth dimensional field, millions of years ago, she was designed with a 12th dimensional grid around her for the sole purpose of keeping her entire experience contained. Her experience is she is a higher consciousness that chose to experience herself in a physical form, literally for the sole purpose of experiencing a shift in dimensional fields within the same form. So she wanted to experience herself in a 5D physical form, and she wanted to shift herself into a 7th dimensional physical form, and she wanted to experience it. What would this be like? Hard for us to understand, but that's exactly what happened. That's why the Earth is here. And so in that process, there was a 12th dimensional grid created by the Galactic Federation of Light that literally kept her entire experience contained. All consciousnesses that wanted to participate and be a part of this came into this 12th dimensional grid and remained in the 12th dimensional grid this entire time. Now, the physical body was holding a 5th dimensional frequency. One of the laws that was set up at that time was that if you were a consciousness that wanted to incarnate into a 5D physical form to experience this shift with the Earth, you had to hold at least a 6th dimensional frequency or higher in order to come into the grid and participate. Why? Because the physical body would be shifting into a 6th dimensional field. The consciousness that you are, the consciousness that they are, that any being is, it never shifts. The consciousness doesn't ascend, it's the physical body. So if a consciousness wants to come into a 5D body for the sole purpose of moving into a 6D field, 6th dimensional frequency, that consciousness has to already be at a 6th dimensional field. Therefore, only 6th dimensional consciousnesses or higher were able to enter into the 12th dimensional grid and be a part of this entire experience that we're currently at right now. With that being said, how did 5th dimensional beings and 4th dimensional beings get here? As the Earth and human bodies in 5D began playing in the 5th dimensional field, after 1 million years, 2 million years, humans, 5D humans, began to play with energy, with the quantum field, and they started playing in 4D consciousness. And what they started to do is they started to create 4th dimensional beings. And I did a video on this, and I'll link it down below, but they started to create 4th dimensional races and 4th dimensional beings. It's very easy to create another race or another being when you understand energy. And the reason that they started to create a 4th dimensional race or a 4th dimensional being, a 4th dimensional consciousness, is that that consciousness could exist on the earth plane over and over and over again as that consciousness. You didn't have to incarnate into that consciousness. You could experience the 4th dimension as the 4th dimension. So it was no longer you, a higher consciousness, ascending in a body, right? It was now 4th dimensional beings that were existing as 4th dimensional consciousness on an earth plane that was now in a 4th dimensional or a 5th dimensional field. Again, I'm not going to go into detail of how this fall happened, but I'm going to link the video down below. How did it start to move down into the 4th dimensional field? How did these beings be created and designed? It's all in the video. I'll link it down below. It's very complicated, and I don't want to waste too much time. But all I can say is that humans, well, higher dimensional beings in human form, in 5D form, started playing in fourth dimensional fields. And they started to design, higher dimensional beings started to design fourth dimensional races. They designed fifth dimensional races, okay? And fifth dimensional races and fourth dimensional races started to exist inside a 12th dimensional grid. And these fourth dimensional races loved playing with lower frequencies and lower consciousnesses. These fourth dimensional races and beings, they're the Greys, the Anunnakis. There's a lot of names for them, the Reptilians. I want to state and preface that there are higher dimensional consciousnesses that exist as Reptilians, as Anunnaki, as the Greys, as the Zetas, right? They exist in higher states of consciousness. They also created races that are in a fourth dimensional consciousness. And it is those fourth dimensional races and beings that we label, that we have the same name for, which is confusing for the human, because you're like, well, how could there be Greys that are of a higher frequency and Greys that are in a fourth dimensional frequency, right? It's just how the human labels things. We have to have names, and this is how we've labeled it, okay? So there are Greys, there's Anunnakis, there's Reptilians, there's a lot of beings that are both in a higher frequency, beautiful light beings, and in a fourth dimensional frequency and consciousness. And it's the fourth dimensional consciousness beings that like to play in the lower consciousnesses. They like to dabble. And they are the ones that brought the Earth down into a 3D field after millions of years. Again, the video's down below. So, after millions of years, we have reptilian races, okay? When the Earth moved into a 3D field, there was a fall and a massive physical collapse and chaotic destruction of the Earth plane, and it was cleared. And all beings, all races, all bodies, everything was taken off the Earth plane, and the Earth began again around 20 to 25,000 years ago in a third dimensional field. Again, watch the video, it goes into detail. So everything was off the Earth plane, and the Earth began again, all over again, with third dimensional forms on her, including third dimensional bodies. And so all of a sudden, higher dimensional consciousness started to go into the bodies and started experiencing the third dimensional field and moving through this consciousness and moving through this ascension process. Where did the fourth dimensional races go? Where did the fourth dimensional reptilians go? They moved out of the Earth plane and they moved into a fourth dimensional field within the 12th dimensional grid. So for thousands of years, while the Earth was in a 3D field, these reptilian consciousnesses existed and currently exist, just like the Palladians exist in an 8th dimensional field somewhere in this 12th dimensional grid, right? And so on, all these other beings. The reptilians existed and exist still. They're held, they're not gone, in a 4th dimensional field or cloud outside of the Earth plane, off the Earth plane, in the 12th dimensional grid. And when the Earth was designed in this third dimensional field, the Galactic Federation of Light put a 5th dimensional grid around the Earth. And the reason they put a 5th dimensional grid around the Earth is so that the 4th dimensional races could not come back into the Earth plane. Because all beings have free will. And so if you put an energetic grid around, if you are existing in a lower state of consciousness, a lower frequency than the grid, energetic grid itself, you can't get through the grid. It's physics. The reptilians couldn't move themselves into a higher frequency in order to move down into the Earth plane. So they existed and remained in this 4th dimensional grid off the Earth plane for thousands of years, watching this whole experience. And it wasn't until around 7,000 years ago when the Earth began to creep up into a light quotient where she was holding 50% of the light that she needed to reach a 5D consciousness. So one of the universal laws that has been put in place for Earth is that when she reaches and when she is holding 50% of the light needed to stand in or reach a 5D field, dimensional field, there would be a trajectory or timeline that she would enter into where lower dimensional consciousnesses and frequencies would never be able to pull her back down. So there wouldn't be a tug of war. So all she needed to do was get to that 50% mark or quotient within her body, physical body, within the Earth's planet. And she would be on a trajectory or timeline where without no matter what occurred, she was going to be able to get to 5D consciousness. 7,000 years ago, she was around 48%. She was very close. And so Earth, as a consciousness, said, I want assistance. I want to get there quicker. Open up the grid and let in higher dimensional beings to enter in and physically assist the humans so the humans can start to hold higher frequencies so that we can get this party started, so we can get into that timeline. When the Galactic Federation of Light opened the grid, not only did higher dimensional beings come in, but so did the fourth dimensional races and beings. And although in that now moment they closed the grid up, the races and beings were already inside. And so what unraveled for those 7,000 years is not only did the humans create beautiful structures and cultures and civilizations that began holding higher frequencies, right? In South America, in England, in Egypt, all over the world, right? But if you look at where all of these really powerful, potent portals are on the earth plane, Machu Picchu, the pyramids, stone formations that you're like, how did these get here? Those were all designed and created by higher dimensional light beings with the assistance of the human body to create portals or high frequency zones where the humans could begin to activate themselves in order to shift the planet and the human collective into higher states of consciousness. And these places are still around today. And the humans have all these stories about how they were created because they can't understand it. They were created by higher dimensional light beings. Now, at the exact same time that this was happening, the fourth dimensional races and the fourth dimensional beings like the reptilians also were in. And they began to infiltrate the human body. And for thousands of years, they were able to start to pull the frequency of the earth plane and the human down into lower frequencies. The way that the reptilians, because you see the Anunnaki and the Greys and the Zetas and other beings, they worked with the humans differently. They created hybridization programs. They created the abduction programs. They did a lot of experiments on the body. So they would take the physical body and do experiments on them. The reptilians did it differently. The reptilians literally infiltrated the human body and entered into the human body. Now remember their energy and consciousness. So when they come into a third dimensional field, just like the higher dimensional light beings, like the Palladians, the Arcturians, the Sirians, right? When they come in, they're light. You don't see a reptilian floating around and standing in front of you and jumping into your physical body. It's not how it happens. That's why there's confusion around the reptilians. People are like, what do you mean there's a reptilian in that body? That's a physical reptilian. How does it get in there? It's consciousness and energy. As soon as they move into a third dimensional field, they remain in a fourth dimensional frequency and consciousness. You can't see them. And so they came in and they literally entered into energetically the human body and took over the human body. And when they did that, they were able to control and manipulate the human. And the human, or the higher consciousness that was experiencing themselves as the human, was literally suffocated. It was like a being came in, suffocated the light of that consciousness, and took over the human personality. They took over the human's look, right? So the human didn't look the same. The human acted differently. The human spoke differently. Everything was different. The personality was different. And the reptilians fed off of the consciousness of fear. So the more they could create fear, the more they were able to enjoy that consciousness. They loved it. They enjoyed it. Same with control. The more they were able to control, which is a consciousness, the human collective, the more they were able to absorb that consciousness. It's like a drug, right? They need it. It's why they're here. To experience and absorb those lower consciousnesses. It's like a candy, it's like a kid in a candy store. And so the way they absorb it, the way they experience it, the way they feel it, is by being inside the body to digest it. That's how they get the juice of it. It's more fun. It's more tangible. And so for thousands of years, they remained as fourth dimensional consciousnesses inside this third dimensional grid. They didn't multiply. Okay, so once the grid shut, which was right away, they couldn't multiply. So there were hundreds of thousands of them. But they just continued to move into bodies, and then when that body died, they would wait and they'd move into another body, and they would wait, move it, so they were constantly moving into bodies. Around 1920, 1930, 1940, about 20 year span, right? Give or take. When the atomic bombs were being created, there is a universal law that was created that if the Earth plane would be physically destroyed, the higher dimensional light beings in the Galactic Federation of Light can come in and assist. That is one of the only ways that the Galactic Federation of Light can ever override free will, is if the actual physical Earth would be destroyed. And once these beings started to create nuclear warfare and bombs that would literally destroy the entire Earth experiment, the Galactic Federation of Light came in. And when they did, they started to energetically pull the fourth dimensional consciousnesses and races off the Earth plane. And this took, in human years, about 90 years. For them, it was instantaneous almost. It was a now moment. For the human, it took about 90 years. So right now, in our now moment, there aren't any fourth dimensional races like the Anunnaki or the Greys that were doing the experiments. There's very few, if any, on the physical Earth plane, inside the physical Earth plane, continuing to do these experiments. If a human is experiencing this, they are having the experience off the Earth plane. I want to preface this. I'm not saying that humans aren't being experimented on. Very few are still. Very few. Very, very rare. If somebody is experiencing that, they're experiencing it outside of the Earth plane. These beings are no longer able to come in. It wasn't challenging for the Galactic Federation of Light to take these fourth dimensional races off. They energetically could pull them off quite easily. The Reptilians were a whole nother story. Why? Because the reptilian consciousness was inside the physical body. And so what the Galactic Federation of Light noticed was that as they were trying to pull the energy, the consciousness, it's light, okay? It's not a body, it's not a physical form like you see, okay? It's consciousness. It's a fourth dimensional consciousness, reptilian consciousness. As they were trying to pull it out of the body, what would also happen is the spirit or soul that was in that body living as that human would also come out. And so they were noticing that the actual human would die. And so they had to be very careful how they pulled the reptilians off the earth plane. They had to be very, very careful how they did it. And the reptilians knew this. So they knew that they had an advantage, so to speak. And so what happened after 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years is that eventually 90%, give or take, have been pulled off the earth plane. There is 10% of the reptilian consciousness left on the earth plane. So I asked them about numbers, right? Because we like numbers. So they said about 10 to 20,000 reptilians are left. Now remember, they cannot multiply. They've never been able to multiply because they're stuck inside the grid. So what we are recognizing and understanding in this now moment is that because the Galactic Federation of Light is their hands are sort of tied, they can't get the rest of these reptilians out without killing the human or the higher consciousness in it. It is up to us, the light workers, the way showers, the star seeds, to alchemize, clear, and dismantle this consciousness. And this consciousness we call the reptilian consciousness. And this consciousness, this reptilian consciousness, is inside human bodies. And this consciousness is the small minority, the small number of humans that have been controlling the systems that have been in place, that have been controlling and manipulating us for a very long time, by creating a massive amount of fear and by creating programs that are so advanced. The mind control that these consciousnesses have created in order to control us would blow your mind. What they have been able to design under the ground, under the physical earth, would blow your mind. What they have been able to do on an energetics level in order to control would blow your mind. But they have humans, they have human bodies, and so they have a human body doing it. And we have names for those humans, right? Maybe there's politicians, maybe some of them are movie stars, maybe some of them are elite, right? In places like the Rockefellers or the Rothschild, right? These sort of family names that are behind the curtain, right? We know about them, we've heard about them, but we don't see them very often. Most of the reptilian consciousnesses were not necessarily physically seen, but we are seeing 1000% the systems that they have put in place and used to control us. And that is what you are seeing right now. And that is what we are unraveling, dismantling, and alchemizing. So that, when you think about, I'm just double checking that I'm doing all of this. When you hear that there are dark energies or dark consciousness or reptilians, it is a consciousness that has been on the earth plane for thousands of years. Actually, millions of years they began. And it is our job to clear them. So let me back up for a moment. When I was speaking about 7,000 years ago, that the earth almost hit a 50% light quotient, right? It was holding 50% of its light, 50% of the light it needed to get to the 5D. In 1987, the harmonic convergence, Earth hit that 50%. So it began to jump onto the trajectory and the timeline of absolute ascension. But it was wiggly and wobbly. There was still a little bit of like, ooh, is it there? Is it not there? December of 2012 is when it solidified that timeline. It moved into the trajectory and timeline of absolute evolution of consciousness into that 5D field and beyond, no matter what happens on the earth plane. No matter what happens on the earth plane, no matter what is seen, heard, and experienced on the earth plane, Earth is holding enough light now where she has moved herself and the human collective onto a trajectory and timeline that it can't get off of, which is ascending into 5D consciousness. It's an absolute. And so what we are seeing right now is all of us starting to come online, the Great Awakening, to wake up and to say, holy cow, look at what has been in our reality that we haven't seen. The systems, the groups, the humans, the ways that we have been. It's starting to boil up and come to the surface to be seen. So that we, the awakened ones, that are shining light from our bodies, that are holding higher states of consciousness, can see it and alchemize it for the sole purpose of continuing to pull the human collective into higher states of consciousness and the 5D field. We are dismantling and we are alchemizing the reptilian consciousness. The humans that have that reptilian consciousness in it don't know necessarily that they have the reptilian consciousness in them. Meaning, if you're a higher consciousness and you dropped into the human body, you either chose to say, yes, I will be infiltrated by the reptilians for the sole purpose of allowing the human collective to shift. Because the reptilians are floating in the consciousness. They need to be in the human body in order to be alchemized. Otherwise, we can't see them. Otherwise, we can't feel them. We don't know they're there unless they're in the body. So we need human bodies for them to infiltrate so they can play out their role. And so there are many higher dimensional consciousness, light workers, way showers, and starseeds that agreed when coming down that they would be infiltrated by the reptilians. And there are many higher dimensional consciousnesses that are in the body that had no idea necessarily that the reptilians would infiltrate. So there's a combination, it's a little confusing, but there's a combination of humans that agreed to it, or higher dimensional light beings that agreed to it, and many higher dimensional light beings that were literally infiltrated. So when you look at these elite groups that are human, that have a personality and an ego and a name, many of them are holding reptilian consciousness inside them. And beyond that reptilian consciousness, there is a higher dimensional soul or spirit inside them as well. The reptilian cannot incarnate into a human body because one of the universal laws, remember, in the 5D human body, the only way you could incarnate is if you were in a 6th dimensional consciousness, right? Why? Because 6th dimensional field is where the body was going. When the earth became a 3D field and had the 5D grid around it, the 3D human body was designed to move into a 5D field. So 4th dimensional races and beings couldn't even access and move into the body. Why? Because there's a 5D field around it. But if you're in a 5th dimensional field or higher, you could infiltrate in or incarnate into the body as a higher dimensional consciousness and experience the human body. So 5th dimensional consciousness and higher is what incarnates into the human body. You understand? There is and was a 5th dimensional grid around the earth plane when she began again in 3D. The human body is in 3D. The human body is moving to 5D. 4D is just a bridge. It's not a stopping zone where we hang out and play. We just move through it. And so because of that 5D grid, any consciousness that wants to incarnate and be in the human body has to be at a 5D consciousness or higher. And so the 4D consciousnesses, the reptilians need human bodies to experience this 3D consciousness. And the only way we can clear out the 4D reptilians is by having them in the bodies. And so there are many higher dimensional consciousnesses that incarnate for the sole purpose of being infiltrated by the reptilians in order for them to be alchemized into light. And there are many way showers, light workers, and starseeds, or any other name you want to call it. It's really not important, the names. We get so attached to names. Well, what about this? Am I this? What about this name, right? We get really concerned and attached to names, and they want you to not worry about labels and names. It's consciousness and energy. But there are many higher dimensional beings that dropped in and that are literally on the front lines of dismantling the reptilian consciousness. Many. And there are many of us that are only going to be watching it. There are only going to be seeing it. Okay? So how are we alchemizing that reptilian consciousness? The same way we alchemize anything. As it comes up to be seen, we see it. Oh my God, there's fear. There's control. There's manipulation. There's greed. Right? There's all these, the systems try to keep you down. They try to dim you. And so we see it, we acknowledge it, and then we hold ourselves in higher states of consciousness as often as we can. We feel it as well. We feel the fear, we feel the anger, we feel the rage, we feel all of that. And when our light shines on it, it alchemizes it. It's the natural process of alchemization. So the 5G towers, the chemtrails, the vaccines, COVID, sex trafficking, Black Lives Matter, animal abuse, child abuse, human abuse, you name it, right? You name all of the systems. I don't care what it is. Keep naming them. Any system that is shrouded in fear, control, manipulation, greed, terror, abuse, those are the systems that we're collapsing. And it is a small group of humans holding reptilian consciousness that is controlling the large systems that are in place. Now, I want to preface something. There is evil. So there are higher dimensional consciousnesses incarnated into human form and playing out a life that looks evil. Okay? Many humans that you could look back in history and even right now that do very evil things. They abuse people, they abuse animals, they cheat, they lie, they steal, they do horrible things. They're not reptilians necessarily, okay? So just because somebody plays out a very evil life doesn't mean they're reptilian. There is a small number of the reptilians. Small number. And they are typically behind the scenes. They usually they're not necessarily in the limelight. Now, there are reptilians in the limelight. Reptilian meaning humans that are holding the reptilian consciousness. There are reptilians that are holding that are in the limelight that you know and that you see. But the majority of them are very quiet, right? You see them every once in a while. So these humans that are in our every now, that are very evil and doing kind of evil things, that are just kind of everyday humans, they're not reptilian consciousnesses. They're just playing in the evil. So this isn't about, my guides want to get this very clear, you guys. This isn't about how do I know if somebody's a reptilian or not. That it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you know them to be reptilian or not. What is important is that you recognize the systems that you're collapsing. It's not individual reptilian consciousnesses. It is the system and as a whole that you want to focus on. And the humans that are in that system, they will alchemize. So for instance, sex trafficking, right? Massively large system. What humans are in that system doing those things, controlling those things, creating those things? A small handful are the puppeteers, are the reptilians. Thousands of them are being controlled by the reptilians. So they don't have reptilian energy in them, but they are controlled by the reptilians. You understand? It's a small number that's controlling the sex trafficking or pedophile ring that's around the entire world. But there are hundreds of thousands of humans that are doing it. And they're being manipulated by this small group of reptilian humans. It's like an energetic needle that's going into these humans in order to control them. And then they suck out that fear, they suck out that control, they suck everything out by manipulating and controlling the humans. So a human that they're controlling, doing all these horrible things, they're able to suck that energy out of them. Does that make sense? And so what happens is you have humans that are doing these horrific things, being controlled by a small group of reptilian consciousnesses. And a lot of them don't even realize that they're being controlled and manipulated. They don't realize that there's a mind control happening. It's that potent. It's that powerful. So some characteristics of a reptilian consciousness, though, just so you can start to kind of tap into it. They're very charismatic. They're very charming. They have a very big presence to them. So when you come in contact with, and it's rare that you may actually come in physical contact with one, but if you do, they take up a room. You don't necessarily see them as being evil or mean or dark. They're not saying evil, mean, and dark things. They're very deceptive. They're very deceiving. Very deceiving. They're very intelligent. And they have a different look about them in their eyes. So if you look a reptilian consciousness in the eyes, you will see and feel the reptilian consciousness. You'll feel it. And it's almost bone chilling. And when you are in the vicinity of and connecting and communicating with a reptilian consciousness, you almost can't look them in the eyes. And when you do, it feels very strange. It feels like not right, like something isn't good, right? And yet here is this person that's standing there that looks completely normal, that's happy and jovial and laughing and making jokes, right? A reptilian consciousness isn't evil looking until you feel into the energy. And then it's quite shocking. There's something that just feels off about them. So again, this isn't about necessarily trying to pinpoint and say, oh my God, they're reptilian. Oh my God, they're reptilian, right? Because there are a lot of humans that are controlled by the reptilian energies. And so they have that energy sort of around them, right? But they're not necessarily holding the reptilian consciousness. So the reptilian consciousness, the human, is controlling with mind control that other human. And so there's an energetic cord sort of connecting one human, reptilian, to this human. And so they've got that sort of weird energy to them, but they're not necessarily holding the reptilian consciousness. And a lot of times, a human that is holding the reptilian consciousness, you can almost see them as a reptilian consciousness. It's very strange. And the more that we start to alchemize these systems and these beings, right, the louder they're going to get. And that's what's happening right now. As we start shining light on them and saying no more lies, no more manipulation, no more fear tactics, no more mind control, none of that, right? We start standing up and seeing. We start to awaken into what has been happening, what they have been trying to do and have done for hundreds and thousands of years. They freak out because what they are used to experiencing and having, that fear consciousness, that control consciousness, that manipulation consciousness, they aren't getting it anymore. Literally, energetically, As more humans wake up, they are falling out of fear. They're moving out of fear. They're not playing in fear consciousness. They're not emanating fear consciousness. And if you don't emanate fear consciousness, the reptilians don't have anything to feed off of. Then they get really loud. They get angry. They start doing these tactics that are nuts. They start doing things that are so bizarre that you're like, did you honestly just do that? Did you honestly just say that? Censorship is a huge piece of mind control and manipulation. Who's censoring? Why are they censoring? And what are they censoring? Right? So if we start to take away and if we start to move into this bigger perspective, we start to realize that it's not about the human. It's about the consciousness inside the human. That is what we're clearing. And it is going to get louder. The systems are going to get louder. That consciousness is going to get louder because it is being literally melted like the Wicked Witch of the West. I'm melting, right? And it gets louder and louder as it melts. That's what's happening. So here is the last message. This is not about fear, like, oh my God, there's reptilians out there. It's a consciousness, first of all. So just let it be a consciousness. It's not these dark looking reptilian lizard-like beings that are running around the earth plane. It's a consciousness that is inside a human form, that is controlling and manipulating that human, and that has been for thousands of years. And we are now courageously, as warriors of light, shining the light on those systems, shining the light on those reptilian consciousnesses, and literally melting and dissolving and alchemizing it. Just isn't fun. Doesn't feel good. Second, we are absolutely, unequivocally, without a freaking doubt, on a timeline and a trajectory that is moving into higher states of consciousness and a fifth dimensional field. It's an absolute. And what that means is that no matter what we see unraveling in the external, we're still moving into higher states of consciousness. We cannot be pulled back down. They cannot win any longer. Their tactics and their control, their manipulation, their ability to manipulate energy, it doesn't work when more and more higher dimensional consciousnesses, which is you and I, wake up, step out of the third dimensional matrix and see everything for what it is. Our light is shining too bright now for them to manipulate and control us. That's the beautiful piece. And there will be a now moment in a future now where they will know, they being the reptilian consciousnesses, will no longer be on the earth plane. How? Because as we shine the light, hold higher states of consciousness, see, feel, speak up, and shout that this is no longer going to work, the energy and light that comes from our physical bodies literally moves that consciousness, dissolves that consciousness. It dissolves that human. It dissolves that system. And whether that means they get put in jail, whether that means they end up dying in some way, whether that means that they shift the way they're doing things and all of a sudden they move into doing something completely different and that consciousness dissolves out of the human. There's a lot of ways that that consciousness, the reptilian consciousness, can dissolve. But what is happening is that it is alchemizing into light. It is shifting out of where it is now. By us shining the light, by us holding higher states of consciousness in order to shine the light, for us to stand up and say no, for us to keep teaching, to keep speaking about it, to feel it. And for all of you that are not doing any of that, but are aware, you're holding higher states of consciousness, and that is doing a magnificent amount of work. For all of you that are like, I don't go there, I don't look at it, I don't want to know, perfect. Because you are doing so much work by holding the higher states of consciousness in your body, because that is emanating out a vibrational pulse of high frequency light that is hitting those systems and those humans that are holding that reptilian consciousness, and it's dissolving it. You don't need to know how this works. You don't need to see it physically happen because it's energy. But this is how we dissolve it. And slowly but surely, the consciousness, that dense fear, control, manipulation, greed consciousness starts to dissolve or melt or alchemize. It's a trajectory and timeline that is an absolute. It's not a matter of will it. It's a matter of it is. Let's go. How much longer? And it's going to take time. Human third dimensional time. It's going to take years. And that is why we are preparing right now to be able to do this again and again and again in every now moment with as much love, compassion, and empathy for the entire human collective, including the reptilian consciousnesses. Because the reptilian consciousnesses are just being them. They are playing in a third dimensional field, inside a third dimensional body, experiencing really dense third dimensional consciousness. And to us, it looks horrific. So again, they have been dimming our light or suffocating our light in order to keep us in a controlled and sort of fear-based sort of way of living, even though you would never necessarily believe that that was happening. There was this undercurrent always of fear. What's next? What do I need to prepare for? Do I have free will? Do I have free choice? Can I speak my truth? Like, what's going on? There's always this underlying fear in the human collective. Designed. There's always been a control. We just didn't realize until now. And now we're stepping out of it, and it sounds like and looks like it's getting louder, and it's not. It's not. It's not. Whew. Okay. So, there you have it. There was a lot in that video. And I will put the links to the 12th dimensional grid video and how we shifted from 5D to 3D in down below as well, if you want to do more or listen to how that worked. Some things are going to make sense. Some things are like, no way. Maybe all of this was no way. And again, like I said in the beginning of the video, you don't have to hold any of this. None of this has to be your truth. This can all be hogwash. But it's my truth. And it's the Galactic Federation of Light's truth. And there's millions of ways in which we get to see our reality. This is just one. But many of you have seen this play out. Many of you were here thousands of years ago building the pyramids, building Machu Picchu, building the structures down in South America, Central America, South, these centers or fields that were holding very high frequencies. Many of you were engaging and interacting with the higher dimensional beings physically on the earth plane. And many of you remember the fourth dimensional races and the battle that began to play out way back then. The civilizations that were destroyed by these fourth dimensional beings. And so here we are in this now moment. And it is our turn as higher dimensional beings in human form to put an end to it, to be done with that cycle. That 7,000 year cycle. It's coming to an end now because of you. So not only are you in the human body to experience this really powerful, very beautiful shift in consciousness, believe it or not, you're also in the human body to shift that reptilian consciousness and alchemize it into light and to be done with it, to wipe our hands of it and say, let's go. It's our turn and it's what we're doing. I hope this made sense in some way, shape, or form. If you have questions, leave them down below. I'll do my best to look at some of them. Maybe I'll do another video answering these questions. Be gentle with yourselves. Thank you for listening to this. Thank you for being here now. And I love you. You are loved. You are held. You are honored. You are cheered on in every now moment, whether you see that, hear that, feel that, or know that. It is true. And remember, the light wins. It already has. I love you.